Yukong is one of my favorite supports for specifically a crit ratio DPS that might not gain a lot of crit in their build, right? So let's say like a Jingliu, for example, who that gains 50% crit rate, or an Argenti who gains 25% crit rate, right? It really helps make up for that loss of crit rate that you really need, or essentially are forced to have if you go with a crit damage body. And a lot of characters who might have like multiple hits in their attack, for example, like a 3 skill point Dan Heng, or even like maybe Sila's skill or like a base Dan Heng skill who has like multiple hits, like a Topaz, for example, that's a bunch of hits, right? The higher crit rate you have, the more you can make sure that every single hit crits and that you take advantage of your crit damage. And Yukong right now is the only character in the game that can buff your crit rate to the extent that you can actually consistently have 100% crit rate, right? And there's other benefits of Yukong too. For example, she does have some, that's just AI, that's not even her. She has some great synergies with certain characters, right? And I'm going to be talking about that first. So, one of the characters that I'd really like to use her with is Sela. One of the cool synergies about Sela is that you can actually take advantage of both turns of Yukong's buffs with Sela. And the way that works essentially is just by making sure that Sela's speed is high enough so when you finish off with a basic attack, that thwack with her A6 is going to give you 20% action advance. And when you get that 20% action advance, you can actually make it so Sela is the next character after her turn. So she just goes her turn, her turn. And I'm actually going to insert a clip here, and you guys are going to be able to see how you can get 2 turns of Yukong's buffs with Sela. Making sure that our Sela is at 100% crit rate and 280 crit damage, I believe. So we're going to skill to make sure we get an extra 30% defense shred on our bosses. And this ult is beautiful, 226, and we'll finish it off with a thwack, making sure that we use Dance 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 immediately afterwards, because you see that 20% action advance plus Dance 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 is going to make it. So now this is a brand new turn. This is not Resurgence, right? This is Sela's just natural turn. And this means that we can take advantage of both of Yukong's turns of ults, of buffs, right? And we don't lose anything. Okay, and so for another character that I really like to use her with is Clara. I love the synergy that Clara has with Yukong, because if Clara is your 4th character, you can make it so when you get your enhanced follow-ups with her ult, they're completely buffed as long as you don't have a character that is going to go before the enemy attacks you twice, right? And as long as you can make sure that happens, then Yukong's buffs work really well with Clara. Another character that it might work really nicely with is obviously a Dan Heng, right? Although actually that might be like an E2 thing, so we can kind of skip that. Follow-up characters thrive with Yukong, right? So for example, a Tingyun, right? Tingyun, his Lightning Lord, right? As long as you can make that hit after his turn, and characters like Bronya might not be able to keep the buff, but a Yukong, because it has 2 turns, will be able to keep that buff. So that's like a really good synergy. And like a Topaz, for example, you know, essentially let's just skip the character part and go just into some of the other things, like for example, her Eidolons, right? Her Eidolons are really good, and there's actually a little bit of a misconception, misnomer, I don't really know, but a lot of people say that her E6 is extremely important. I'll be honest, I rarely use or actually take advantage of her E6, right? As you can see here with this E6, when Yukong uses her ultimate, she immediately gains 1 stack of Roaring Bowstrings, right? So that way you don't have to use her skill if you want to save the skill points. But me, I love using Yukong specifically with Bronya's Light Cone, and everybody can get Bronya's Light Cone because you can buy it in the shop, which I 1000% recommend. I would completely avoid going for star passes. It is viable. It's not a bad option, especially if you're free to play, but if you are free to play, I would actually suggest that Bronya's Light Cone is a massive, massive benefit to an account, even though Yukong will not be able to take advantage of the skill point that you can gain from Bronya's Light Cone. The 10% energy regen paired with the 30% damage bonus makes it so it has pretty much 2 out of 3 of the benefits that you can give to her, and it's 2 out of 3 of the best benefits that some light cones can give, to be honest. So another thing I wanted to specifically talk about was her E2. Her E2 is her most important Eidolon. And I say this because Yukong regenerates additional 5 energy whenever an ally's current energy is equal to its energy limit, right? So if you pair Yukong with 3 characters that can consistently get their ults up before Yukong, and the DPS doesn't actually have to, because if one of those characters is Tingyun, you're always going to get your DPS up, their ult up before Yukong's. So it is extremely important, and I would say if you have an E2 Yukong, use Yukong, because E2 makes everything perfect, right? Now, if we're going to get away from the Eidolons, a lot of people kind of think, okay, Yukong has incredible multipliers for a support. You can build her to do some real damage with her ult. I say, fuck that. Don't worry about damage on Yukong whatsoever. Build her as the tankiest tank possible, and she will never die, and then you're never going to have to worry about Yukong's health or defense or anything. And you also don't have to get upset if Yukong doesn't crit, right, when she does eventually use her ult. That is a nice little bonus, right? Now, for her planar ornaments, or actually we can talk about relics in general, right? I think that probably Passerby is probably her best relic set, just because Yukong is a character that all of her buffs are innately tied into her kit. Like, they have no correlation with her own personal stats. And because her buffs aren't based off her stats, you can build her however you like. That's why you can either build her as a sub DPS or just like as a pure support. And I say build her as a support in the way that you can gain an extra skill point from Passerby, right? Additionally, on top of that, Penacony or Von Whack rather, both of them, because they gain the 5% energy regen, is going to be her best planar ornament if you want to consistently get 3-turn ults up. And even if you're not using her with another imaginary character, it probably is worth it to get her ult up more than maybe like the 10% crit damage you can get from an effect keel. And speaking of effect keel, her effect res doesn't need to be anything, because with this A6 ability, she can essentially resist any debuff 1 time every other turn. And this makes it so you always kind of want Yukong to get targeted by like dominations or imprisonments or, these types of debuffs, because she just completely outright absorbs them and, isn't affected by them. It's really, really great. Now, if we're going to go into her energy requirements, as you can see, she does have that 130 max energy, and I'm actually going to use this opportunity to kind of talk about how you can consistently get a 3-turn ult up with Yukong, right? So let's just say you're going to be using her with a basic skill rotation. So we're going to go skill 30, basic 20, plus another 30. Now, when she has her ability her Eidolon that gains 5 energy per character, let's say that you have 3 characters that do go up to max energy, that's going to be an additional 15, which is actually relatively consistent as long as you pair it with characters that can consistently get their ult up in 3 turns, right? So this is going to be the amount of energy that she gains. Then we'll have her energy regen is essentially just 1 plus a maxed out energy regen rope, so that would be 19.4%. Then we'll additionally add on 10% for Bronya's light cone and an additional 0.5% for Penacony or Bonwak, rather. So she is going to be at 134% energy regen. So when you use basic skill and take advantage of her second Eidolon, right, you are going to be almost at the energy you need. Or actually, you are going to be at the energy you need, because then you just add the 5 that you get by starting off, right? And then you will be at 132, which is great because her energy requirements is 130. So you will be hitting that. Now, let's say that your E2 only proc twice. So if you are using her with a Tingyun cannot consistently get a... Well, actually, Tingyun can, but I usually use Tingyun with Dance, Dance, Dance. So let's say Tingyun can't get her ult up, then you will essentially just be at 90. Then this energy will be the same, right? And then we can just take this and multiply that by here, add our 5 energy, right? And then we're at approximately 126. And if we just have 2 activations or 2 characters to use a ability or their ult during Roaring Bowstrings, then you can essentially just add a 2 plus 2, so that'd be 4 energy to 126, right? So this here would be 4 times 1.344, and then add that to here, and then there we are at, again, 131. So we can get her ult up this way relatively consistently if we do have the 5% energy from Art Planar Ornament and the 10 energy from Bronya's Light Cone. Okay, so another thing that I actually kind of want to talk about is the speed tuning of Yukong. A lot of people struggle, perhaps, right, with making sure that Yukong goes behind your DPS, and my suggestion to this would just be have a distribution of speed boots that you can kind of toss on her in any way. Like, try to have a level 8, level 9, try to have like a level 12, just try to have random levels of speed boots, so that way you can make sure that your speed on Yukong is right. Now, that is probably the most difficult part of Yukong, because if a lot of people don't have too many speed boots or not too many options with speed and substats, because it is one of the toughest substats to get, it is probably the hardest part of building her. But when you do have enough relics so you can kind of fiddle around, mix and match some stuff to get your correct speeds, it really, really works. Now, another thing I want to talk about for Tingyun is her talent, because interestingly enough, you can take advantage of this talent in a couple interesting ways. One of the ways that I like to have her... I'm sorry, I said talent, but I meant technique. Her technique makes it so she just starts off the battle with Roaring Bowstrings immediately. Some really cool synergies with that is, for example, Tingyun. Tingyun, you don't want to have her be too high on attack, usually around 2500, depending on the light cone and level of character you have. And if you use Tingyun's skill during Roaring Bowstrings, it makes it so you actually don't need to run pretty much any attack relics on Tingyun, right? Because you can run her with HP, run her with defense, and then Yukong's ult or technique is going to make it so the attack bonus you get is essentially 2 relics worth of attack, because Yukong's skill is 80% attack, and 80% attack is essentially 43 times 2, right? So 86 is really, really close to to 2 attack relics, right? So that makes it so Tingyun's skill is completely maxed out. Another thing that's really cool is, if you want, you could use like your DPS's ult. Shut up. You could also use your
use your character's ult, for example, like an E2 Dan Heng with action advance, with a Shu Shang with action advance, base 4-star Dan Heng to get an extra turn. Oh, these fucking, I need to mute my phone. Anyways, yeah, so these are just a couple quick little synergies. For also Sela, for example, you can start off the bat immediately with Sela's ult, get a kill, go into Resurgence, taking advantage of Yukong's Roaring Bowstrings, and that Roaring Bowstrings is going to make it so you are going to build up a little more energy to make sure that you can actually get her ult up consistently with just one basic attack if you do start off with her technique. Yeah, so essentially that's like a quick little discussion on New Year's Eve talking about Yukong. If you have any other synergies, I'd love to hear them. Any other maybe like hidden techs, hidden tips, secret techs, anything, you know, leave it in the comments. I will respond to it, and I really like these discussions about characters. You know, I'm not really too much of a theory crafter, but I'm kind of trying to get a little more into like the in-depth side of the game so I can kind of understand it a little bit better, and I appreciate any of the help I can get. So thanks for watching again. Adios.